Does it look interesting? Maybe. Is it necessary? Maybe not. Does that matter? Not sure. DC and Warner Brothers just dropped the first teaser for their Clayface movie, which comes out in October of 2026. This teaser was shown at CinemaCon last week. We got some descriptions of some of the moments, now we're seeing them. This movie is fascinating because of what it is and what it isn't, and there's a lot we don't know about it. But I do want to talk about the trailer, talk about where this movie is, and why I find the idea of it so compelling. So, real quick, for people that don't know too much about Clayface, the character. And this is kind of confusing for a couple of reasons. The main one being, there are multiple Clayfaces. This is true of a lot of villains that have been around for a while. Clayface, though, specifically has gone through more than you would expect, especially for a villain that has never been in a movie before outside of the Lego Batman movie. In fact, I would guess, as I hear myself saying this, I know I'm immediately going to be proven wrong, Clayface might be the Batman villain with the most different incarnations. And it's not just reboots, different characters have been Clayface, and they've done it slightly differently. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference because Clayface is such a distinct look. And if they're a Clayface, you kind of just assume they were the other Clayface too. But for the purposes of this, there's really only two versions of Clayface that matter. In the comics, there's Basil Karlo and Matt Hagen. Let's go with Matt Hagen first. Matt Hagen is a character that was Clayface in the comics. He is, I believe, the second Clayface. And he is an adventurer who fell into a mystical pool of Clayface goo, turned him into Clayface. He shows up from time to time, and especially when all of the Clayfaces work together, he's usually there. But Matt Hagen is not traditionally the Clayface. However, when Batman the Animated Series made its very famous episode, Feet of Clay, it used the character of Matt Hagen. Even though the version of Clayface that you follow in that story feels a lot more like the first Clayface, Basil Karlo. Now, Basil Karlo has gone through a couple of changes in his origin, but the part that's important is this. He is an actor who used to be handsome, but something changed. Sometimes I think it's just because he naturally aged and became less handsome, but sometimes it's because of an accident. But for some reason, Basil Karlo is unable to get these leading man roles, so Basil started relying on different chemicals and procedures, and one of them was called Renew, and it was experimental and dangerous, and it gave him the ability to change his face, smooth out wrinkles, simple stuff. But then, like all of these villains, he is accidentally doused with the chemical and turned into a Clayface guy. Now, Clayface has a couple of different powers. Sometimes he can just look different, like he can transform like Mystique into a different person. But sometimes he turns into a big mud monster man, and he can grow really large, turn his arms into weapons, he's indestructible, although he can be frozen, and there's ways to beat him. But okay, so now I think you can maybe see why this is a little tricky. The character in the Batman the Animated Series episode and the character in the movie are both named Matt Hagen. However, the storyline that the animated series follows, which seems to be what they are adapting into the movie, is more of a Basil Karlo story. What seems to be an out-of-work actor whose face is injured in this movie not because of a car accident, it seems like it's because of some sort of mob vengeance, which is not unlike your typical Batman villain story. I mean, the only other Batman villain we have spent that much time with in the new DCU is Dr. Phosphorus, who had a very similar origin to this. But okay. So that's who Clayface is. As I'm sure you can put together from me telling you all of this right now, if you've never heard of Clayface, it's not super surprising. Like I said, he's only been in the Lego Batman movie. He obviously showed up in the animated series, but everybody showed up in the animated series. But he's never been in a live-action movie before. He's not one of Batman's most significant enemies. Like, I wouldn't say he's one of Batman's top 10 villains. He's also not one of the villains that is foundational in creating Batman, the same way that someone like, at least in the Nolan vs. Ra's al Ghul, is like an important figure in the history of Batman. Clayface isn't really that either. And he has no interesting connections to other characters in the new DCU, except he's already in it, because Matt Hagen is apparently the Clayface we meet in Creature Commandos. Now, this movie is definitely going to be an origin story, so it's not shocking that none of this comes up during Creature Commandos. But also, Clayface's introduction in Creature Commandos isn't set up the way that you would expect for a character who is about to get their own spin-off movie or just their own origin movie in general. He really does just seem like an enforcer villain who happened to be in this story. So while Clayface is not the most significant Batman villain ever, and definitely not a Batman villain that movie audiences would expect to see, but Clayface is one of a few Batman villains who has shown up in the new DCU already, and it is this version apparently. Now, why are they making this movie? Was the big question a lot of us had. What it seems like happened is sometime very early in the production of the new DCU, like perhaps even before it was really in motion, Mike Flanagan, who people probably know from Dr. Sleep, or all of those Mike Flanagan shows like House of Usher, Haunting of Hill House, Midnight Mass. He was a fan of the Feet of Clay episode of the Batman animated series and wanted to adapt that into a feature film. And like Mike Flanagan is a name that has some pull in Hollywood, and also Clayface is not a character that I think DC would really care about. Like neither the old DCEU or the new DCU seem to have big plans for Clayface. So if a person with a name that matters, that gets people excited, comes in with a very specific idea about a character nobody really expects much from, and is able to pitch a movie that is conceivably cheap compared to some of these other movies, like of course Warner Brothers greenlights this. And when James Gunn takes over, Clayface is folded into the new DCU. But here's what's kind of tricky about this. Mike Flanagan, clearly interested in the character, comes up, writes a script, writes second drafts of the script, and gets James Gunn on board. James Gunn saying, you know what, we weren't planning on doing a Clayface thing, but Mike Flanagan, you sold me. They start developing this Clayface movie. Apparently Matt Reeves was also having conversations with Mike Flanagan before the James Gunn thing, but that really isn't important for this story. But then Mike Flanagan wants to do an Exorcist movie, so it's like, oh, I gotta walk away from Clayface. That's okay. Bummer, but I'm sure you guys will do cool stuff with it. But then there's a rewrite done of the original script. The script that James Gunn said was so great, it convinced him to greenlight this movie. And of course, rewrites happen all the time, but it was enough that Mike Flanagan at this point was saying he is no longer involved in making this movie. Like, he hoped it would go well. It didn't seem like a bad breakup. But it was interesting because the only reason this existed was because a very specific writer-director showed up and said, I would like to make this movie, and the version of it we were going to get is neither directed by nor written by that person. And were it not for Mike Flanagan saying, I really, really want to do a Clayface movie, there's no way that James Gunn and the new DCU would be focusing on that right now. Because they've got bigger fish to fry, and they've got movies to make that are going to make lots of money. They'll probably make a Batman movie soon. They'll probably make a Wonder Woman movie soon. A Teen Titans movie. There's a lot of other projects that are higher profile, probably expected to make more money and sell more toys and all the stuff that Warner Brothers wants to do. Now, to be fair, Clayface is the kind of thing that I think these studios need to be making more of, which is a sub-$50 million superhero movie, even though Clayface is kind of a supervillain, but, you know, same difference. Because let's say Thunderbolts makes like $300 million, it's still a flop because of how expensive the movie was to make and how expensive it is to advertise. If Clayface makes $300 million, it is an incredible hit. So there is a case for this. The only reason it's confusing is because DC does not seem to be prioritizing any other stories like this. The movies coming up in the future are Supergirl, Superman, Man of Tomorrow, probably a Batman movie, and probably a Wonder Woman movie soon. So why all this preamble? Well, I think this is important to understanding what this movie is and like why it exists. Because in a world without the cinematic universe, you wouldn't need to think about it this way. But because of the new DCU and like because Superman has a movie and then Supergirl shows up in that movie and she's got her own movie and Superman is added into that movie, like it does seem like continuity between these projects is important. So one thing you can do when you start seeing these things is go, okay, so how is this next story telling this bigger story? How is this adding to this universe? Why Clayface? Why now? And the answer is it doesn't really seem to have anything to do with the bigger picture. It just seems like a movie that a specific creative was interested in and was able to will into existence. And it may sound like this is dismissive because it's saying like, oh, this movie doesn't matter. It's not going to move the plot forward. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I expect a lot of people in a theater who have never heard of this movie before to see it and go, am I supposed to know who Clayface is? He's a Batman guy, right? Is this Pattinson Batman? Is this the other Batman that hasn't existed yet, who maybe could end up being Pattinson Batman in a perfect world? And I don't think this teaser did a ton of work to explain that difference, to explain this is the world he exists in. Like at any point, Hawkgirl could show up and beat up Clayface if she wanted. This is the same universe. And this is the same Clayface from the Creature Commandos show, which has to be the least watched thing in all of the new DCU, which isn't saying that much because it's really just the Creature Commandos show, Peacemaker show, Superman movie, and then the Supergirl movie and Lanterns eventually. But like, I don't know, this movie is strange. That's all the background. What's the trailer look like? I think it looks interesting. I think there's a couple things that I would like to see more of to make me feel better about this movie. But the things that this really needed to communicate, I think it more or less got, which the biggest one is tone. Is this a horror movie or is this a superhero movie with horror elements? And I think this trailer sold this is a horror movie that has a superhero comic book character in it. And I think that is smart because that is something people wanted from this genre for a while and the genre has not really been able to produce. Like, sure, New Mutants was kind of a horror movie, but it wasn't. And Werewolf by Night was a throwback to a very specific kind of horror movie, but not a modern horror movie. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness was directed by a horror director and had horror-y elements, but clearly was not a horror movie. But this is, and the trailer is very clear about that. I found this trailer quite upsetting. I feel like I'm going to find this movie quite upsetting, just because the idea of molding around a face, that kind of body horror really gets me. And it seems like the effect they're using for the clayfacing is going to look good. Like, it's going to be a very detailed, photorealistic effect, which is going to be upsetting for people. This movie has been compared to The Fly and like other similar body horror movies. I mean, the movie that comes to mind the most right now, obviously, is The Substance, because that is also about an actor who is attempting to save a career with a magic goo. And that makes complete sense. I imagine the pitch for this movie was done long before The Substance was a movie people knew about, but it still feels like that's the movie that this will be compared to the most, especially based on the visuals. We only know a couple of characters that are in this movie, too, and we see them all in this, I assume. Main one, Tom Rhys-Harris, is playing Clayface, Matt Hagen, and he's most of the trailer. He's underneath the bandages, but also you see him in these little kind of flashbacks, memories to when he was a movie star or when he was getting his face all cut up. The other character that we get a good look at is Naomi Ackie, who people probably recognize from Mickey 17 or the I Love Boosters movie that'll be out later this year. She plays a character named Caitlin Bates, who is a scientist who is apparently also Matt's love interest. I imagine she invents Renew or something. There's also a police detective, although he is unnamed. Who knows? Maybe it's probably not Jim Gordon, but maybe it's Bullock or some other named cop. But right off the bat, for me, the most interesting thing about this trailer is besides the DC branding, you got no Batman allusions. This is not like all those Spider-Man movies that didn't have Spider-Man in them, but did contain in the trailer a scene where the character looked at a spider just so we knew spiders are part of this. Remember Spider-Man. It does feel like it's really trying to stand on its own. Now, that doesn't mean Batman's not going to be in this. There's a very good chance Batman shows up at some point. I don't think it's crazy that he would be a post-credits scene. And not just to set up other movies, but because Clayface is a Batman villain. He is a character who Batman has to fight because nobody else can. So in a world where Clayface survives this movie, I would have to assume Batman's at least kind of interested. Especially because we do get a couple looks at Gotham City here. We see two things that are named, at least two. Two that I clocked. One, you can see Dr. Bates walking down a hallway with clowns on it. That is apparently part of Amusement Mile, which is the amusement park clown locale that Joker tends to spend a lot of time in Batman. We also see on the side of, I believe, a boat or some sort of dock, the Narrows written. The Narrows, people will remember from Batman Begins as a neighborhood in Gotham. There are plenty of neighborhoods in Gotham that get name dropped in the comics. The Narrows, I think because of the Nolan movies, is one of the ones you see more of. One thing that DC fans will probably find interesting about this trailer, it is the third project so far, the third movie, that is using the look branding. Superman was look up, Supergirl is look out, and Clayface is look fear in the face. I didn't assume we were going to keep doing this, but if we are, I have suggestions for all the future movies. My suggestion for this one would have been look away, right? Because that's part of his deal. It's like, oh, I'm so hideous, right? But also, you could have just done look different, right? That's a phrase. You look different. He looks different every single time. The Lantern Show, while not a movie, I think could do one of these as well. I'd imagine for that one, you'd want maybe look sharp. Something like look alive. Something you would tell a cop. Something to be like, look around. The word will doesn't really work. Like look brave, look mean. Like neither of those. Maybe mean look. I don't know. And then Man of Tomorrow's got to be like look to the future or something like that. We'll see if they end up continuing to do any of those. I think it's a fun idea. Kind of like the Spider-Man movie all having home in the title. Like originally I was like, this is dumb. By the end of it, I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. The song that plays through this trailer, because especially horror movies love to have a familiar song sung either by like a little kid or like in a weird key that makes everything sound creepy. We get Do You Realize by the Flaming Lips, which is interesting because the new DCU is run by Peter Safran and James Gunn. James Gunn, who made Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which also has that song in it, plays near the middle before they get to Counter-Earth. That's a funny coincidence. I will say, overall, trailer's successful. Scary looking. I think as a visual, him wiping the face off of his face works. I've seen people point out, and I'm not positive about this, that even the bathtub he is in might also be him. Like, it would be presented like a scene that's like early in the Clayface scene. He's in the bathroom just messing around with his face. But it might be that this is a little bit later where he has gone full Clayface and he can make a bathtub out of his body and put a version of him in it. Like, that's interesting. I don't know. That might not be the case. What we do see, though, that I think is very encouraging for people like me that want this movie to both be an effective horror movie and tell a fun story, but not ignore the fun comic book stuff that makes Clayface interesting, is the shot where Clayface seems to be in like an alley. You can only see him in shadow, but he turns his arm into a big spiked mace and uses it to hit somebody. That is how Clayface usually works in the comics and cartoons. If this was a very grounded take on Clayface, where he's just like a guy with a mask and he's doing murders, that could work. But this shot specifically suggests that this is going to be a pretty big monster movie. And maybe that will make Batman's inclusion in it, or some other character's inclusion in it, make more sense. Usually when they make these solo movies, there's another character that shows up that you're like, oh, him, right? When Sony made the Craven movie, it also had Chameleon in it. And when Sony made Spider-Man Noir, it also has a Sandman in it, and maybe an Electro or something. So I am surprised that we don't have any other Batman characters that are in this. And I don't know, maybe that's part of the selling point. I think I'd feel a little bit better about this movie if I was more excited about the actor. Not that I think he's bad or anything. I know next to nothing about him. Tom Rhys-Harris is, I would say, more unknown compared to some of the other people that seem like they were up for this role. But like, if this was an actor who I was really excited for, this would be enough for me. If I were a big Mike Flanagan fan, I think this would also be enough for me to be really excited for it. And honestly, besides taking this spot and being the third movie they're releasing, there's really not a whole lot DC has to lose. If this movie doesn't perform well, it won't perform well. I think there's no way it doesn't break $100 million. If that's the case, financially, it's a huge success. And who knows, maybe Clayface will be so popular that there will be 3 or 4 Clayface movies before we get a Wonder Woman or something. That would be a little strange, but there are enough Clayface stories and Mudpack stories and Clayface adjacent characters that you could totally do it. But yes, my overall thoughts on this trailer: effective, set the tone well, gave people that are familiar with the comic story and the cartoon that this is based on an idea of kind of what version of the character we're getting. Still, I don't think it's fully justified outside of the Mike Flanagan thing that they can't advertise anymore, why this movie is getting made at all. But you don't need to justify why individual movies are getting made if they're good. If this is bad, it's going to feel really weird. Like, for people who aren't fully on board with how strange this is, imagine if the Marvel Cinematic Universe started with an Iron Man movie, and then the Incredible Hulk movie, but then, instead of Thor, they made a movie about the Wrecker, a mid-tier Thor villain, who people like and people know, but you're like, well, are we not going to do Thor? That would be a little confusing, right? That'd be a little strange. And if this was still directed by Mike Flanagan, and the version of Mike Flanagan's script that James Gunn really liked, I would go, well, but they must have something. They must know they have something. And the tricky part is, Mike Flanagan is not directing the movie, and we don't know how much of the original script is still there. And like, we do know it's being directed by James Watkins, who did the American remake of Speak No Evil, movie I thought was okay. Or he directed that Black Mirror episode, Shut Up and Dance, the one where everybody's being blackmailed. So like, clearly a competent director, can do horror, can do suspense. But yeah, Clayface is in an interesting spot. I wonder, and it's the only other question I have after seeing this trailer, is, are there people that would see this movie, but because of the DC branding, they go, oh, it's a superhero movie. But if that wasn't there, would they go, oh, cool, a new horror movie? Like, does that audience exist? The audience that's like, well, I didn't see Superman, so I probably won't get this. Because, like, if the substance just randomly had, this is a DC movie, tacked on to the end of the trailer, I think there's a lot of audiences that would go, now I want to see it, because now I know it might lead into the next one, or it's a comic book thing, and we love those. Those audiences are great. I do think there are other audiences that it would alienate, potentially. And I wonder how Clayface is going to deal with that. And again, I think even if this movie is bad, it's going to make more than enough money to justify its existence. So of course they're not going to stop making it. And that's not even to say it looks bad, but like, a worst case scenario for this movie, I still think is going to be okay. Like, this needs to be like embarrassingly bad for this movie to fail. Madam Web made $100 million, and everyone hated Madam Web except me because I love it. But like, a superhero movie breaking $100 billion, especially a horror superhero movie in October, very doable. I would like to see more personality from Matt Hagen, right? And I think there's plenty of time for that, but I'd like to see why we're supposed to like this character, if we're supposed to like this character, if he's supposed to seem like kind of a jerk, maybe he's going to learn his lesson, or if we're supposed to feel sympathetic for him immediately. I think that's going to be tough with like a movie star character, but it can be done. And I want to see what the movie is about. Like, who are the antagonists? Is it the cops? Is it the other gangsters? Do they treat Clayface like he's the only one of these that's ever existed? Or does he show up on the scene and people are like, oh, you're a metahuman like Phosphorus? Yeah, no, we remember that guy. Danced around in the pimp suit. It was weird. And then the other question, does Batman show up? Do you hit a point in August where maybe the awareness for this movie is not as high as you want? And then DC goes, we're going to put Batman in the trailer. The same way that it seems like maybe that's why Superman is in the new Supergirl trailer, is because rumor has it that they added that because they wanted a connection to the Superman movie that people liked. So does that happen? I genuinely wouldn't be surprised. And it doesn't even need to be a specific actor. It can just be kind of like the Dr. Phosphorus origin, a shot where Batman is there and clearly is watching what's going on. But we'll see, that is one other big trailer for the end of the year out of the way. We only have a couple more that I think are like huge movies that we don't have trailers for yet. Obviously, Doomsday, the Narnia movie is going to be a big deal. Robert Eggers' werewolf movie, and obviously Angry Birds 3, a movie that the internet had one of the most amazing headlines ever. But anyway, speaking of like horror adjacent anthologies, and honestly, something like this has probably happened on the Twilight Zone, like a story very much like the Clayface story. The main one I think of is the one where the woman has to get a surgery because she's hideous, but the twist of the episode is she's actually not hideous. She looks like a model, but everybody in that universe has this weird pig face thing going on. It's a classic Twilight Zone episode. And the Twilight Zone, besides just being an interesting show, is also an interesting piece of pop culture history. And one of the most interesting things about it is its creator, Rod Serling. And I was watching a video recently by a creator I really like called Captain Midnight. It was part of their showrunner series about Rod Serling, who they were, where they came from, what philosophies they had, how that influenced the creation of the Twilight Zone. Fascinating stuff. And then you can find that video along with all of my videos early and ad-free, and tons of other stuff on this video's sponsor, Nebula. Nebula is, say it with me, a subscription streaming service that I and a bunch of other really cool people helped create. Nebula has evolved so much over the last 7 years. Sure, you can still watch all my videos early and ad-free. You can watch videos by a bunch of other creators you probably already love. But one of the most exciting things about Nebula is our original programming. Tom Scott has a new series called England, where he goes to every English county to find something interesting. You should check out this first episode where Tom Scott goes to Leicestershire and he visits a bell making factory. You see the entire process, learn how bells are made, and it is not how you would expect, especially since this bell making factory is hundreds of years old and they're still working with some of the same techniques from a century ago. Tom Scott even gets to use a sledgehammer to break one of the bells a little, because shockingly, it's hard to do. It's hard to use a sledgehammer to break an enormous bell. And each episode of England is going to be on Nebula for a week before it goes anywhere else. On top of that, we got a series that I love watching called Abolish Everything, where someone, maybe a comedian, maybe another YouTuber, makes an argument for something that should be abolished. They state their case, they make a very funny PowerPoint, the political establishment gets to weigh in, and then the audience decides what deserves to actually be abolished. This week they did the championship for the second season. They had a ton of really funny people on it. I've never been on that show, maybe sometime in the future. I think I'd be a fun abolitionist. And then later this year, although hopefully not too much later, Nebula's first original dramatic scripted series, Subliminal, comes out with the episode that I wrote, which I cannot wait for you guys to watch. Nebula is the best way to support all of the creators you already love and all the creators you don't know you're going to love, but then you're going to love them when you see them on Nebula. You can also download the videos to your phone, which saves you data when you're not at home. And there are not AI videos on Nebula, so this isn't going to be like YouTube where you go on and you watch a video in a minute or two and you're like, something's off here, and then you realize like, oh, this video is AI, which happens on YouTube and other platforms way more than I would like to admit. Nebula, we all got real stuff made by real creators, and that's why it's great. And a year of Nebula is already a steal at $60 a year, $5 a month. But if you go to go.nebula.tv/thenandocut, you can get a year of Nebula for just $30. That is $2.50 a month. It is an amazing deal. Again, go to go.nebula.tv/thenandocut to check it out. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe. I'll see you next time.